All right, let's dive into this one. Aphra Behn's The Dutch Lover. We've got a whole stack of stuff here, excerpts from the play, some critical analysis, and a bit of historical context, too. So
Sounds like fun.
we're going to try to figure out why this play bombed so hard when it first came out, dig into those juicy themes of love, deception, all that good stuff.
Yeah, and societal expectations, of course.
Oh, for sure. Those were huge back then. And who knows, maybe The Dutch Lover has even more to say to us now than it did back in the 17th century.
You never know. It wouldn't be the first time a play became more relevant with time.
Exactly. So this play throws us right into the middle of, well, let's just say, a lot of confusion, mistaken identities everywhere, tangled relationships, and at the heart of it all is Alonso.
Ah, yes, Alonso, the titular Dutch lover.
Right. Except he's not actually Dutch. He's Spanish and hiding his true identity. And naturally, he falls head over heels for...
Euphemia. Now there's a woman who knows what she wants.
And she's not afraid to go after it.
Exactly. But all these disguises, all this hiding, it makes you wonder, what was Ben really trying to say here? I mean, mistaken identity is a classic comedic trick, sure.
Oh, absolutely. It's been around forever.
But Ben takes it a step further. She uses it to explore how fluid identity can be, how the roles we play can change, and how sometimes...
And sometimes it all blows up in our faces.
Spectacularly.
And boy, does it blow up in The Dutch Lover. You've got mistaken identities leading to duels, accusations flying left and right, even more disguises piled on top of the first ones. It's a whirlwind.
Yeah, and that might have been a bit too much for the audience back then. They might not have been ready for a play that moved that fast.
It's definitely a wild ride. But even with all the chaos, Ben gives us some seriously sharp dialogue. I mean, these characters are witty.
Oh, incredibly witty. Euphemia, especially. She's a force of nature.
She really is. She's smart, independent, and she knows how to play the game of love. She's not just sitting around waiting for Alonso to sweep her off her feet. She's an active participant in the whole crazy situation.
Oh, absolutely. She keeps Alonso on his toes, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And she challenges him, makes him question his assumptions.
And in the end, I think she makes him a better person, even if he doesn't realize it at the time.
I think you're right about that. So we've got this play. It's full of mistaken identities, witty dialogue, and a pretty unconventional heroine. But it completely tanked when it premiered in February 1673 at the Duke's Theater.
Yeah, it was a total flop. And you know what's interesting? Ben herself actually gives us some clues about why it went so wrong.
Oh, tell me more.
Well, in her epistle to the reader, which is basically a fancy letter she wrote to introduce the published version of the play, she lets loose. She complains that the actors totally ruined it.
Really? How so?
She talks about them being unprepared, forgetting their lines, and there was this one actor in particular, the one playing Hans, the real Dutch fop that Alonso is pretending to be.
Right. I remember him. He
Uh-huh.
was something else.
To put it mildly, Ben says she'd love to trounce him roundly in print, which means to publicly criticize him. But she stopped short because, well, he died shortly after the play opened.
Oh, it's a bit awkward.
Right. But she does say de mortuis, which basically means it's not cool to speak ill of the dead. So we get this little bit of gossip, a glimpse behind the curtain of Restoration theater.
And a hint at how frustrating it must have been for Ben, especially as a woman playwright, to have her work undermined like that.
Exactly. I mean, think about it. She writes this sharp, funny play, but the actors don't deliver her lines the way she intended. Could it be that maybe they were deliberately trying to sabotage her?
It's not out of the realm of possibility, especially back then.
Yeah.
Women weren't exactly welcomed in the theater world.
That's for sure. And that brings us to a really important point. Aphra Behn was one of the first professional women playwrights in England. That's a huge deal, especially in a time when women were basically expected to stay home and, be quiet.
It really is. It shows how determined and talented she was. She had to fight tooth and nail just to get her voice heard.
And she did it with such wit and style. In that same epistle to the reader, she takes on those who look down on women writers. She argues that plays don't need a ton of learning, which was something men were supposed to be better at. And she even uses Shakespeare as an example, pointing out that he wasn't exactly a scholar.
Oh, that's brilliant. Using the most celebrated playwright to make her point. It's like she's saying, look, if Shakespeare can do it, so can I.
Exactly. And she's also saying that women, maybe because they weren't allowed to get all that formal education, might actually be better at writing plays. Because plays are all about understanding people, their emotions, their motivations.
The flaws and their foibles.
Exactly. And women, well, they were often pretty good at observing all that, even if they weren't allowed to write about it.
That's a really interesting point. So we have this play that flopped, a playwright battling sexism, and a whole lot of witty dialogue. Where do we go from here?
Well, here's where The Dutch Lover takes an unexpected turn. Amidst all the slapstick comedy, it actually touches on a theme that was pretty common in plays of that time, even if it makes us a little uncomfortable today.
Do tell.
Incestuous love.
Yes. That was a popular theme for some reason.
It was. And Ben, with her usual light touch, introduces this theme through Silvio, a character who's secretly in love with his sister, Cleante.
Now, hold on. Before everyone starts getting the wrong idea, we need to consider the context. This play is based on a pretty well-known folktale about mistaken identities and, yes, the possibility of incest.
Right. It pops up in different forms all over European literature, like in Bandillo's novelle and the Heptameron, which is a collection of short stories. So Ben isn't necessarily saying incest is okay. She's using a familiar story to explore those deeper questions about desire, those societal taboos, and what happens when people jump to conclusions.
Right. It's about those misunderstandings that can lead to some pretty complicated situations.
Exactly. And you know what's interesting? Another playwright, Robert Gould, he wrote a play based on the same folktale. It's called Innocence Distressed, or The Royal Penitence.
Catchy title.
Right. But compared to Ben's play, it's considered pretty dull, like really dull.
Ouch. That's harsh.
But it shows how skilled Ben was. She could take a potentially scandalous theme and turn it into a witty, engaging comedy that actually made people think about society and what was considered acceptable.
She was a master of her craft, that's for sure. And what's fascinating is that the theme of incest didn't just vanish after Ben. It pops up again and again in later works like Walpole's The Mysterious Mother, Shelley's The Cenci, even Wagner's Die Walküre.
It seems like this taboo subject just kept coming back to haunt writers through the centuries.
Maybe it's because it forces us to confront those uncomfortable truths about ourselves, our desires, and the darker parts of human nature.
Yeah, maybe. It definitely makes you think about family dynamics in a whole new light.
And the boundaries we set for ourselves and for society as a whole.
Boundaries that are sometimes meant to be broken.
Or at least questioned.
Exactly. So, we've got a play that flopped, a playwright fighting against the odds, and a theme that's both uncomfortable and strangely compelling. What do we make of all this?
I think it's crucial to understand The Dutch Lover in its historical context. Appreciate Ben's unique voice, what she brought to the theater, and recognize that even though some themes might seem unconventional, they still resonate today.
That's a perfect way to put it. And it leads us to a really interesting question. Could The Dutch Lover, with all its quirks and complexities, be even more relevant to audiences today than it was back in Ben's time?
It really is amazing how something like that, a theme, can stick around for so long. You see it in all these different works, different time periods.
It's different cultures, too.
Right. And you can trace how, people's views on it changed over time.
It's like a window into how society was thinking, what they were grappling with.
Exactly. Like, take Dryden, for example. He wrote a bunch of plays and handled this theme in all sorts of ways, sometimes funny.
Oh, yeah, Dryden. He was all over the place with his plays.
He was. Some of them were straight-up comedies, like The Spanish Friar.
Oh, I remember that one. Lots of mistaken identities in that one, too, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, there were.
Yeah.
But then you have something like Don Sebastian, which was much more tragic, dealt with the heavier side of things.
And let's not forget Ibsen's Ghosts. Now, that one really dug deep into the psychology of it all.
Oh, for sure. And it reflects, like, all those anxieties of the late 19th century.
Yeah, all the societal changes, that feeling of unease.
Right. And even though The Dutch Lover was written much earlier, it's kind of like a precursor to all those later works.
Yeah, it was ahead of its time in a way.
It was. Addressing that taboo subject with a mix of humor and insight, that combination is something that I think still speaks to us today.
Absolutely. So after looking at the broader context, those recurring themes, I think it's time to go back to Ben's own words.
Yeah, let's hear what she had to say about her play, especially about how it flopped so hard.
Exactly, because her epistle to the reader, it's not just some boring intro,
Oh, not at all. It's like she's having a conversation with you.
Yeah.
Directly.
She is. It's so lively, full of wit. She even calls the reader all sorts of funny names like good, sweet, honey, sugar candied reader.
I love that. She's not taking herself too seriously.
Not at all. She's like, come on in, let's have some fun. And then she goes on to defend plays, saying they should be considered among the better sort of books.
That's interesting because back then, a lot of people thought theater was just frivolous entertainment, even immoral.
Yeah, there's real snobbery about it.
Right. And she's a woman saying all this, which makes it even more daring.
Oh, absolutely. It's like she's throwing down the gauntlet challenging all those stuffy academics.
She is. She even says that a lot of what passes for learning is just a bunch of nothing.
It's a pretty bold statement.
It is. But it shows that she was skeptical of, intellectual elitism. She believed that true knowledge could come from anywhere, even from a play.
Right. And then she goes on to criticize other plays of her time, saying they weren't doing enough to improve people's morals.
So she's not just defending her own work, she's actually offering a critique of the entire theater scene.
She is. It's like she's calling for plays that are entertaining, sure, but also thought-provoking.
Plays that make you laugh and think at the same time.
Exactly. And she calls out those who get too hung up on all the rules of playwriting, saying they've missed the whole point.
Because for her, theater's about feeling something, not just thinking about it.
It's about connecting with those human emotions.
Right. It's a sensory experience, a way to connect with the full spectrum of human experience, laughter, tears, all of it.
And of course, she addresses the elephant in the room, prejudice against women writers.
Because she definitely faced that throughout her career.
Oh, for sure. She tells this story about a snobby theater goer who basically says, this play is going to be terrible because a woman wrote it.
It's like something out of bad comedy itself.
Right. And Behn uses this anecdote to directly address the sexism she faced. She argues that if women had the same opportunities as men, they could write just as well.
Of course. But then she does something really clever. She uses Shakespeare as an example.
Oh, yeah. The ultimate trump card.
It is. She points out that even though Shakespeare was a genius, he wasn't exactly a scholar himself.
It's like she's saying, if Shakespeare didn't need a fancy education to write amazing plays, why should women?
Right. And she goes on to say that plays don't require that kind of learning that men traditionally had.
It's almost like she's implying that women, maybe because they were excluded from all that formal education, might actually be better suited to writing plays.
Interesting, because plays rely more on wit, observation, understanding human nature.
Exactly. And women, well, they often had a lot of practice with those things, even if they weren't allowed to show it off in the same way as men.
That's a really clever point.
Yeah.
She's turning their argument against them.
She is. And then she says something that's both funny and insightful. She says, if comedy should be the picture of ridiculous mankind, I wonder anyone should think it's such a sturdy task, whilst we are furnished with such precious originals.
Meaning?
Well, she's basically saying that since the world is full of ridiculous people, writing a comedy shouldn't be that hard.
She's got a point. Especially in the Restoration, which was a pretty wild time. Lots of social upheaval.
Right. It was a time of big changes, and people were acting out in all sorts of ways.
So plenty of material for a sharp-witted playwright like Behn.
Exactly. She was a keen observer of human nature, and she used that to her advantage in her comedies.
But then she can't resist taking another jab at that critic. She suggests that maybe he'd be better off figuring out that ancient English game, which height long Lawrence, instead of criticizing her work.
Now, for those who don't speak Restoration slang, long Lawrence was a euphemism for.
Oh, I think our listeners can use their imaginations.
Right. Let's just say she's telling her critic to go and educate himself elsewhere.
Ouch. But you can sense the frustration there, even some anger.
Oh, definitely. She was tired of having her work dismissed simply because she was a woman.
And that frustration really comes through when she talks about the actual production of The Dutch Lover. She writes that it was hugely injured in the acting, blaming the actors for being unprepared, forgetting lines, basically just being careless.
Yeah, she goes on to say that they didn't speak but little of what I intended for him and filled it with a great deal of idle stuff.
She clearly felt sabotaged by them.
She did, especially by the actor playing Hans. He seems to have gone completely off script, adding his own material, which, probably wasn't as funny as what Behn had written.
Can you imagine having your carefully crafted words butchered like that?
It would be infuriating. And it makes you wonder, was this actor just bad? Or was he deliberately trying to make Behn's play fail?
It's hard to say for sure. But given the prejudice against women playwrights back then, it's definitely a possibility.
Oh, absolutely. And it's a shame because despite its disastrous premiere, The Dutch Lover is actually a really well-written, engaging play.
It is. With a good director, talented actors who actually stuck to the script, it could have been a huge success.
So we have this play that flopped because of bad acting, a playwright battling sexism and societal expectations, and a recurring theme of incest that might make some people uncomfortable today. What do we make of all this?
Well, I think it's crucial to understand The Dutch Lover in its historical context, appreciate Behn's unique voice, which he brought to the theater, and recognize that even though some themes might seem a bit unconventional now, they still resonate with us today.
That's a great point, and it leads us to our final question. Could The Dutch Lover, with all its quirks and complexities, be even more relevant to audiences today than it was back in Ben's time?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is. I mean, on the one hand, The Dutch Lover is definitely a product of its time. The dialogue's fast, the situations are over the top, and all that wordplay.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. It might not appeal to everyone today.
And let's be honest, that whole mistaken identity thing at the brothel?
Yeah, that probably wouldn't fly in today's world.
Probably not.
But if you look past the surface, The Dutch Lover deals with themes that are still super relevant. The complexities of love, the whole deception thing.
Because pressures of society always trying to fit in.
Right. And the masks we wear to hide who we really are, that's something everyone can relate to, even centuries later.
Absolutely. And we can't forget Euphemia. Talk about a strong female character. She's witty, independent, calls the shots.
Yeah, she's amazing. I think audiences today would really connect with her, especially now when people are looking for female characters who are more than just, victims.
Right. Euphemia is not a damsel in distress. She drives the plot, makes her own choices, and she gets what she wants.
That's a powerful message, even centuries later.
It is. And then there's that whole incest thing.
Yeah, that's definitely a tough one.
It might make some people uncomfortable, but it's also a way to explore those darker impulses, the forbidden stuff we try to keep hidden.
Right. Ben handles it with the light touch, but it's still a pretty bold choice for a play in that time.
It is. It forces you to think about family dynamics, societal taboos, those lines we draw between right and wrong.
Lines that sometimes get blurred.
Sometimes. And that's what makes The Dutch Lover so interesting. It entertains you, but it also makes you think.
It keeps you on your toes.
It does. One
Yeah.
minute you're laughing, the next you're questioning everything you thought you knew.
It's a reminder that theater, even comedy, can be a powerful tool for exploring the human experience,
It can be. So would The Dutch Lover be a hit today? Who knows?
It's a tough call.
I think it would depend on finding the right director, the right actors, and an audience that's open to, well, Ben's unique style.
And her willingness to push boundaries.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because remember, this play was written by a woman who's breaking down barriers, defying expectations.
Yeah, she was a trailblazer.
She was. And in a way, The Dutch Lover is an act of rebellion itself.
Challenging the status quo.
Exactly. And that spirit, that willingness to question everything, that's something that never goes out of style.
It's timeless. So that's Aphra Behn's The Dutch Lover. A play that flopped in its own time, but maybe, just maybe, its time has come.
It might have. What do you think? Would it be a hit today? What parts of it would resonate with modern audiences? And what challenges might a modern production face?
Those are great questions. We encourage you to check out a production of The Dutch Lover if you get the chance, or even better, read the play yourself. You might be surprised by how relevant, how funny, and how thought-provoking this 17th century comedy still is. Until next time, keep diving deep.